So thank you all for joining with us today. This is Ted Sherrill. Harvey Nuss is on here with us, our previous president. And most importantly, Jeni German is on here, and she's going to be talking about PCI today. She did a presentation for us at the GRC conference, and it's one. In fact, I think right now, for those of y'all that have attended the recordings of the GRC conference, and I do have to plug that for a minute, those are all out there still. They'll be out there through the end of July. So if you haven't participated in that, there's up to 27 CPE credits. There's 27 sessions that are an hour long that you can attend and answer the questionnaire. And Jeni's actually ranked second out of the 27 the last time I checked, as far as the ratings and the popularity for the session. So Jeni, you did a wonderful job, and all the comments have been excellent. So we had a PCI presentation last month, and off the back of that, people wanted to go another level of depth on a couple of issues that the presenter was not able to go to. So Jeni stepped up and said, I'll take that on, and I'll go down to those, cover those additional topics. And so she's going to be doing some of that today. The other thing that we are doing is, and again, for the webinar, is that while Jeni's presenting, we're going to leave everybody on mute. But when you are, after Jeni's finished presenting, we will open it up. I'll unmute everybody's lines, and you'll be able to ask her questions. One of the things you'll notice is that in the calendar invite, I made it 90 minutes. That doesn't mean that it'll go 90 minutes today, but we were finding that we were kind of, I was on some of the presentations, we still had people that had questions and wanted to ask discussion questions or bring up topics, et cetera, related to the presentation. And we were forcing a hard stop at an hour. And I was speaking with the board the other night, and we decided, why not extend it another 30 minutes if it's needed? We may finish today. All sessions will go at least 50 minutes so that everybody receives at least one CPE. And if you are on, again, for 30 minutes, you get half a CPE, 50 minutes, you get a full CPE. And if you're on, I guess, 80 minutes, you get 1.5 CPEs. And 100 minutes would be 2 CPEs. So that's kind of how it works. I do want to cover again something that has changed recently. We no longer, the board has agreed that we no longer are going to participate in the TSBPA, which is the certification board for certified public accountants. And those are the CPAs were the ones that required the polling questions be answered and the survey and all that. That's no longer required for you to receive CPE credit, because we are not offering CPA credits any longer. If you have an issue with that, please email me at president@isacahouston.org. But it looked like we did a thorough analysis of our 2,000 plus members, and we only had approximately 7 CPAs that we could identify. And the board, we had a discussion, it just did not seem right to pay the fee, which is over $1,000 a year, plus they audit us. And in addition to that, we had to do all the polling questions and everybody was subjected to. And so we chose not to do that anymore. So I don't want to delay the presentation any longer, but I just did want to cover that because that is something new. So when you hear the polling questions today, I'll be posting them through the polling panel. I used to post those on chat so that those of y'all using a browser could respond on the chat. I'm no longer going to do that. I'm not going to post the survey via chat. These are no longer required. We would like you to answer them. It also shows good attestation if you're ever audited. that you were participating, etc. But so that just to let you know, but I'm not gonna, I want to listen to Jeni as much as y'all do. So I'm not gonna be busy with trying to post all that out to chat. So again, that's a little bit of the housekeeping. If you have questions, you can post them to the Q&A. The only questions, if I could encourage you, only post something to the Q&A that for Jeni that you really feel like time is, like it would not make sense later to ask it. If you can ask the question after the presentation, then like I said, we've allotted a lot of time for discussion and questions, and that way you can ask them in person. And then if she needs clarification on it, or maybe the perspective you're coming from or whatever, it can be interactive and not be as stale. And one of the things I really want to compliment Jeni about is and she's mentioned this to me and I've taken it to heart, is we want to try to make these webinars as interactive as possible. So we're going to try to get out of the mode of having you just submit questions through Q&A and have it, have the presenter present, but then have it be an interactive dialogue. And I think that'll service everybody even more. So again, if you have to drop early, again, you get a half a CPE for every 30 minutes you attend. And no longer is the polling and the survey mandatory. That was for the certified public accountants. So with that, Jeni, I'm going to turn it over to you, and looking forward to hearing about your PCI presentation today.
Thanks so much, Ted. An hour and a half, someone as chatty as me took that as a challenge, and I think we're going to try and fill that hour and a half today. Let's see. Welcome again to PCI Card Present Payments. Yes, the title changed. That happens with me because the data changed as I was studying this whole thing. My name is, well, Jeni German. I'm the PCI Compliance Analyst for Waste Management. I've been a PCIP since 2014, and I've learned a few things in these 7 years. I also hold the CISA and the new certification that they call CDIPSI. I think that's cute, so that's what I'm going to call it, CDIPSI. A few weeks ago, I was looking for something that I couldn't find, and I just had it the other day, and my vendor said, oh yes, it's on the list, and here's the documents, and I'm like, no, and it started a search. And of course, it was a complicated relationship because aren't they all? So I started down a path of understanding that I needed to have in order to feel good about the job I do. And that meant understanding the P2PE and the card present payment business. So I came here today to share with you what I've learned. One of the first things, and this is not hard, just like everything else, once you understand it's not hard, but it is very particular, just like PCI is very particular. So one of the things I want us all to be able to do is identify card present payment transactions that are in scope for PCI, especially in our environments. We want to be able to describe P2PE as defined by the SSC. And we want to understand how a P2PE implementation impacts our environment, whether if we don't have one or if we do have one. And most importantly, I want to impart some familiarity with the P2PE program guide and the P2PE standards document. Then we're going to talk about P2PE and E to EE. What's the difference and what difference does it make to us? Toward those ends, first we will review card present payment transaction attributes. We will define the P2PE program and the P2PE solution, which is the end product of the program. We will look at the first 4 sections of the program guide, the ones I've outlined here. We will look at the first, I think, 7 sections of the standards document. We're going to talk about E to EE. We're not going to look at E to E. Well, we're going to look at some things about E to EE. Then I'll share with you my conclusions, and then I'm going to ask you to share with me whatever you want to. Card present payments. What is required for a transaction to be considered a card present payment? A customer has to be present. A card has to be present. The transaction must capture electronic data at the time of the sale. That means the card must have an EMV chip or a magnetic strip. If it has one or both of those things, but it's captured with one of those old-fashioned swipey machines or by hand or any other way except electronic capture, it's not a card present payment. It must be captured on a POS device or one of those card readers that we attach to our tablets, or one of the tap-enabled devices that I think are super cool. Your telephone, your cell phone, when you pay for your latte at Starbucks, that's also a card present payment because the electronic data is captured immediately, and there you are right there. The P2PE program, it's a cross-functional program, which means the SSC blended parts of other programs that are already in place, particularly the PIN transaction security point of interaction, POI document, the payment application data security standards, which we know from our assessments, and the payment card data security standards that we know as the DSS, that we have grown to just know every control in that thing, right? That's the program. The P2PE solution is the end product of the program. It is a combination of secure devices, applications, and process. It must encrypt the data at dip, swipe, or tap. The data stays encrypted until it gets to the end of until it gets to its decryption point. It is assessed in accordance with the P2P standards, and it's listed on the P2PE website, the PCI's P2PE validated solutions website. That's a solution. That's the end product of the program. What happens in between? The SSC adopted the P2PE program in 2012 with the intention of better protecting payment card data and reducing merchants' PCI scope. That actually was a thought in their heads. This program guide, I don't know if you can, go download it and take a look at it, and if not, do it later. It's probably something you will want to look at. It's on the PCI documents library. It's intended for assessors and product vendors and solution manufacturers and people who are creating the things that we want to install in our environment. I consider that it's also intended for us so that we can understand what's going on. Honestly, knowing the backstory helps me be a lot more confident in what I'm doing here. And again, that's why I want to share this. This program guide is an overview of how to get your products validated. The first part of it is basically a high level that we're going to look at. The pieces that get to be validated are the applications, the components, and the solutions. Application plus components equals solutions. They are independent and they can play well and get validated. Once a solution or product is created and ready for validation, the assessor will get all the parts and pieces that are needed and do the assessment, creating an ROV, report on validation, very much like the ROC that we're used to seeing for our regular DSS assessments. The assessor sends it to the SSC if approved and says, hey, here's another one, we like it. The SSC reviews it. They will get, then if they like it, they'll get the fee from the vendor and they'll get everything they need. And then they'll give the vendor back an AOV and then they'll post that on the website. Simple process. All the products must be revalidated each year and fully reassessed every 3 years. The program guide points to many resources and documents that you probably want to be familiar with, depending on how close you are to this process. The ones listed on this screen are all documents that were created for the P2PE program, except for the data security standards, the next to the last one, the QSA requalification requirements. Those were existing before. All the other ones you see here are tweaked for this program. The ROV, we know that document, but now it's P2PE. Additionally, they point to standards that have been in place or that they've put in place over the past decade or so. And we're familiar with all these documents, the DSS, the PIN security, the PTS hardware. I'm not familiar with that one, honestly. I'm not going to be familiar with some of these because I don't get into the technical details. I can if I want to because I know where they are and I know what's in them. The program guide also identifies all the roles and responsibilities of the players in this P2PE game, starting with the vendors. Each of these vendors have specific responsibilities: solution providers, application vendors, component providers, encryption management services, decryption management services, encryption key management services. Third-party services have responsibilities. Payment brands have responsibilities, and the SSC have responsibilities. They're all very spelled out in this document. Also, the QSAs and the PAQSAs. The customer's main responsibility is to use the implementation guide that is a required deliverable for any validated product, whether it's a component or an application or a full solution. There are also recognized laboratories that are considered partners with responsibilities and payment device vendors. This is an overview of the validation process. The P2PE vendor chooses an assessor. The assessor gathers all the documents that he needs to do the assessment, including the VRA, the vendor release agreement, I believe is what that is, and the implementation guide. Then he assembles the report, he or she assembles the report on validation, sends all that to the SSC. The SSC, if they like it, they bill the vendor for the acceptance fee, they collect the implementation guide, they send back the AOV and post the solution or product on the validated list. I think y'all know where that is. If you don't, we'll look at it in a minute because I don't do multitasking on presentations. That was the first 4 chapters or first 4 sections of the program guide. Anything beyond that is actually beyond the scope of this presentation and totally at your discretion whether you want to go look at it or not. I have reviewed it. I don't need that to make me comfortable in doing my job. And I have to draw boundaries around some of this PCI stuff just because of what is my job and what isn't my job. If I don't need to have to know that, then let me learn something I do need to know. So now let's look at the standards overview, speaking of what I do and don't need to know. The first 3 bullets on this page are taken right from the document, and it's pretty straightforward. The purpose is to provide guidance, requirements, testing procedures for the inputters to the process. It's for the providers, the vendors, the assessors, the companies, and it's for us too, so we can know what they're doing. And it's meant to facilitate the development, approval, and deployment of encryption solutions. And we know that PCI likes to stay at least caught up with the game, if not ahead of the game, on validating bleeding edge products, if you will. They do identify 2 types of solution providers. A P2PE solution provider is, in my own words, a third-party outsourced system where somebody else is in charge of the implementation, design and implementation and management of the P2PE system for the merchant customer. A merchant managed solution is special and it gets its own appendix in the standard, Appendix A. It does have to comply with all the same requirements. But the merchant takes on the responsibility for complying with those because they take on the management of the solution. That's going to expand your scope. And that's okay. If that's what you want to do. The DSS controls are written across 12 sets of requirements. The P2PE standards and controls are written across 5 domains of concerns, if you will. Domain 1 is secure management of the hardware and software that sits in our fields and takes the data. Domain 2 is the secure development of the payment applications that are part of the transaction package, but they're not encrypted. They see, I don't know if they're encrypted, sorry about that. They see the account data in clear text, and that makes them a risk. Therefore, they have to be included in the validation process. Domain 3 is about the overall management of the solution. Domain 4 speaks to the secure management of the decryption environment. And domain 5 is about the key management. We can see here that these are all encryption oriented. So P2P is all about encryption and it's all about technical details. What do we care about that? Well, we care about what's implemented in our field. We care about understanding what's being told to us when we need to analyze new products. That's why I want to do this research and see what people are doing. This secure cryptographic devices. I don't encounter these every day. However, this is a huge part of the P2PE standards. There are different types of SCDs that are included in different solutions, and each one of these components have a responsibility to different domains in the standard. I just need to know that. At the moment, I don't need to go see the details, so I haven't. Again, this is another section in the overview, and they go through, again, the solutions can be managed by a single solution provider, that's the third-party solution, merchant managed, or what I call a hybrid, where it could be different pieces of it sourced out. Doesn't matter who is involved in the process. They all have to validate with the SSC, all the pieces, all the hardware, all the software, all the entities that are involved have to be sanctioned. And there are QSAs for every part of that process to make sure they are sanctioned. So what is the scope of an assessment for a P2PE implementation? Never been involved in this. This is done before the implementation gets to me. But it makes sense when I look at it. The first domain is targeted at the applications and hardware. Those are all in scope. The applications, the clear text applications are in scope. Domain 3, they make a point to say that this cannot be sourced out to anybody. Whoever manages the solution is responsible, owns domain number 3 and is responsible for that. Domain 4, management of the decryption environment, and domain 5, everything involved in the key management services, hardware, software, people, processes. It's all in scope. We understand that. So this is all about P2PE. Where does E to EE fit into all of this? I looked and looked because I kept coming across when you're qualifying new products for your environment and your vendors are telling you this and that, and you're thinking about how does it fit in to the PCI scope and your business people are trying to make it fit into their processes, it can get tricky. I looked at a few, I Googled it. I went outside of PCI and I Googled it because that's my search engine of choice. I don't care what you use, you're going to find the same stuff. There are a few technical references to E to EE, which I don't understand. It's a real thing, but I don't know. Some people say, TransArmor says that end-to-end solutions means that there's no party between the terminal and the endpoint. Yet a diagram showed me that the endpoint was the payment processor, which then had to send it to the acquirer. Somebody else says that there are stops on an end-to-end solution, and somebody else says, no, they're not. I was just going, it's like, what, do I need to even understand this? Here's what I understand. End-to-end means a transaction is encrypted when it is taken at the tip, swipe, or tap, which are options now, and it stays encrypted until it gets to the acquirer. Point-to-point means it's encrypted, and then when it gets to gateway 1, it's decrypted and then re-encrypted for its travel to gateway 2, etc. on until it gets to its endpoint, which may be the processor or the acquirer, or they may be the same people. So at the end of the day, I decided that the technical specifications of P2PE and E to EE are not relevant to me and my job. Here's what is relevant. Let me see that number on the list. Can't find it on the list because they haven't gotten to that part yet. Then let me see your ROV. Let me see your AOV. I mean your AOV. I don't want to see your ROV. Your AOV. So I don't want to, I know that there's an E to EE. I know that the vendors package things to make it easy to sell their products. I don't care what they call it. When SSE was started in 2012, it probably looked different. I mean, when the P2PE was started in 2012, it probably looked a bit different than it does now, 10 years later. Did it go from P2PE to E to EE? One of you out there knows something about this that I don't. And this is why I want us to talk about it. I will never know everything about everything. And together we know so much more than I ever can alone. So Ted, if you will, open up the mics and let's see if anybody wants to talk about anything out there. Oh.
That sounds good, Jeni. I will work to open them up right now. So give me.
How does that work best? Do people want to raise their hands or do they just chat it up?
No, I'm gonna take them off mandatory mute. So you'll be permitted to speak. So you can unmute yourself just like in a Zoom meeting. And let me just say real quick, one reason we don't use Zoom meetings, because it's not like I enjoy having to administer this, but the webinars require when you log in, you have to input your email. Please make sure you're using your ISACA email. Again, I've mentioned this before, but this allows us to, this will be the email that Joyce will send the CPE certificates to. So if you did not use the right email or whatever, you can send a chat to the panelist with the email that you would like us to send your CPE certificate to. But just going forward in the future, if y'all can try to use your email when you log in that you want your CPE certificate sent to, that will help us out. But I'm going through right now and opening it up. So again, Jeni really wants this to be interactive today. So I'm hoping y'all have questions, and most of you now, we've still got a few more to do, but most of you should be allowed to talk. So if it shows you are, yeah, we got a question.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize. Don't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to ask the question that was in the chat first on behalf of Abby Julian, and she can come in and follow up as appropriate. But first of all, very good presentation. Thank you, Jeni. And then the question is, have you heard of the PayPal EIS devices? What is EIS?
No, I have not heard of an EIS device, and that's very curious. PayPal is an e-commerce transaction, not a card present transaction, but the device makes me think that now we have a new PayPal device out there. No, I don't know about it, but I guess I will be. You want to tell us something, Abby?
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Ted. I think you were open to other questions now.
Correct.
Issues with headset. Oh, people are having connectivity issues. Yeah, I get that. I'm not going to tell you what happened to me today, but here we are. So does anybody want to have a talk about anything related to P2PE, E2EE, the process of validation, the devices in your field, or anything else related to PCI? As far as I'm concerned, is open for discussion. I had a question from somebody yesterday that was not related to P2PE. So if there's not any questions yet, let me see. I'm not good at multitasking. You'll have to tell me if there's questions out there.
There's no others in the chat now.
So Raymond says, is end-to-end more secure than point-to-point in data transmission? Well, it depends on who you ask. My QSA, who I ask, there's some vendor documents that say the P2PE is better than end-to-end and blah, blah, and all that. You can find anything you want. My resource, as we've discussed before, is my QSA and or my acquirer. Your acquirer has the last word on what is and what isn't. I honestly don't know. So I said, hey, what's the truth on this? And he said, hey, we've been taught all these years that it's an end-to-end system. It's called P2PE, I don't know why, but it is an end-to-end system. So I honestly don't know.
Hey,
Who does?
Jeni.
Maybe y'all know.
Hi, this is Richard Haig. Yeah, so E2EE is basically a non-listed point-to-point solution that hasn't gone through validation with the PCI Council. The reason it exists is because in some cases, these solutions existed before point-to-point existed. And in most cases, they were rolled out by the vendors such as TransArmor or First Data. And some of the large acquirers were already pushing this out because they wanted to reduce the scope on their merchants and also just demonetize the card from the environment entirely. And so these solutions are being pushed by large acquirers in a lot of cases that have the leverage to basically say, we're going to accept this no matter what. And that's why E2E exists. It's no different than point-to-point encryption. They both do the same thing. It's just one's been validated by a QSA and is allowed to reduce your scope. The other one has not been validated in most cases. They might have what's called a NESA to go along with it, which means it's non-listed. Usually these solutions fail with the registration or certificate authorities because they're unsigned certificates that were built in years ago. And so they can't pass a standard point-to-point assessment.
Okay, thank you. I've got about 10 questions, Richard. That's very good. But you mentioned NESA, which let me make sure I understand. If you have an implementation, a card present implementation, a POI device with software on it, and it is not a sanctioned or validated P2PE, then you have to get additional testing on your devices to prove the encryption, right? And that's what NESA does?
No.
No.
So the NESA was put out because the council realized that we as QSAs, I've been a QSA for a number of years now, we're running around and running into these solutions, and you're looking at it and there's no card data, right? It's all encrypted. There's nothing we can do about it. And in some cases, the acquirer was pushing these solutions. And so the NESA was meant to basically allow a point-to-point QSA to look at the solution and run through it and say, okay, here's what you as a merchant need to worry about in terms of scope and risk, and here's how the solution reduces the requirements, and here are the requirements you have to deal with. In all fairness, it's a little it's kind of a band-aid to a problem that the council is trying to resolve, and there's never been a good solution, to be honest.
Thank you. Noted. Richard Hagg, QSA.
So Jenny, you might want to, you can probably stop sharing the screen, and then that way it'll be easier for us to identify who's speaking.
Da, 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 da.
There you
Oh, wow. Beautiful. Thank you. A year, 15 months of Zoom meetings, and I'm still not a master. I just don't know what to do. Okay, so any other P2PE conversation? I mean, what is it? Is there anything that confounds you or confuses you? When you need, do you ever have to validate a solution or research something, a device that you need to implement a new something in your environment? If not, that's great. We can move on because there's lots of other things to talk about that we don't understand. I had a question yesterday from someone about how long, about an alternate payment process when you lose power in your call centers and you have to write down credit card numbers. And that requires its own process. And the question was, how long can you retain that data? How long can you retain that data? Because what if it's a big problem and it takes a week to get resolved? Well, my usual answer is check with your acquirer, check with your QSA. My experience has been that if you have a narrative or a standard or a policy or a document in place that says, this is how we do these, and it says we keep them locked up in the back room under the porch or wherever until the systems come back up. That means as long as it takes. You can verify that with your people who have the last word, but in my experience, a documented process that has been accepted in the past is fully in compliance with that. It doesn't have a time on it because we know that power outages can go over just a day. Or you might want to have a caveat in your policy. Anybody have any other thoughts about that?
I would just add, you're allowed to keep it up until post authorization. After that, you have to destroy it. So
Right.
once you run it through the system, it's done. But there's no requirement on pre-auth data, which means you haven't run it through the payment network yet.
Beautiful. Thank you for that clarification. What else?
Hi, this is Rosa from. Hi, Jenny.
Hi, Rosa. Where are you? I don't see you.
Hi, thank you so much for asking that question.
Does that help?
Yes, that's very helpful. That's good to know that you could just say until the system comes back up. I have another question regarding the end-to-end. So if you do have an end-to-end solution, then I mean, does that mean that you cannot then complete the SAQ P2PE?
I don't know. I would have to go look at the SAQ P2PE because not having used it, I would just need to look at the document. I don't know. Why do you?
So Jenny, the council actually clarified that today. There's a number of FAQs. I forget the exact number, but they basically flat out said that non-listed solutions cannot use the SAQ P2PE. They have to use a full SAC.
So non-listed solutions have to use the full SAQ. Does that answer your question, Rosa?
Yeah, it does. But so then that seems to then leave you with a lot of NAs on the SAQD. Is that correct?
That is correct. They effectively threw it in the assessor's laps to determine the vagaries of it and take on the risk for it. Because they also said that the assessors are not allowed to assess the encryption solution because they're not point-to-point QSAs, which means that most likely we're going to have a NESA, and then we're going to use that NESA to fill out an SAQT and follow. So the SA, usually a NESA will say something like, as a merchant, you're responsible for this, or you need to validate this with your provider. And then we, as a QSA, have to validate that you did whatever the NESA said you were supposed to do. But it's a pretty big gray area, and some QSAs may not want to go down that path, especially after what the council said today. But there's like 3 FAQs they mentioned on the call today that start with 1400. And I think if you search for non-listed solution or point-to-point, they'll pop up.
Okay, thank you. And where can I find more information on the NESA that you're mentioning? Just on the council website, or?
Council website's probably the best. Yeah.
Okay.
So NESA is a council sanctioned, an SSC sanctioned product or process.
Is that a question?
Kind of. It didn't sound like it. Sorry. I've recently fallen in love with the SSC's Fact Page because it helps understand stuff. And yes, I'm surprised that that is a council thing. I don't understand that fully. I'm going to have to look at that some more. Thank you, Richard, for bringing that to us.
Sure. Like I said, it's a Band-Aid. It's a bit of a gray area. It's even a gray area in terms of, so I'm a point-to-point QSA as well. I've actually done an ESA, and in general, we will only do them for solutions which were already in place. And so if they're not already in place, then you need to go through point-to-point and get certified. So they're basically grandfathered solutions is what you could consider them.
Yeah.
Although, unfortunately, some point-to-point QSAs play a little fast and loose. They know they can't get it through the council, so they go that route. Is another abuse of those.
Yeah, so this is why it gets tricky. You have to know what people are doing with the product that you're trying to get validated. And like Richard said, this is supposed to be very black and white, but it never is. I don't think there's anything ever black and white. There's a lot of subjectivity into many of these controls, and that's why I have to get my QSA to make a call, because it doesn't matter what we all think. It's just not as concise. Richard, is there anything else or any problem area that you would want to highlight if you were talking to people about problems they encounter, just general problems? I find that all relationships are complicated when they involve acquirers, vendors, and the banks, which are generally the acquirers. So don't forget about the processors. And then you've got 2 sets of vendors. Relationships get complicated. You just have to work with those one at a time. Understanding what they're bringing to you is very important, but also the whole process of having it implemented and doing what you think doing is important. Sorry about that. I thought I'd turn that off. Is there anything else you would like to highlight to us about P2PE or PCI in general?
I would just say that, wherever you can, you want to use a certified solution. And if you can't use a certified solution, but, for whatever reason, you need something from the vendor, or you have an existing relationship with the vendor, you want to make sure that any contract language you have with them states that they will adhere to applicable standards, whether it's point-to-point or, now it's the secure software framework. The payment application DSS or PADSS is actually expiring at the end of this month and will no longer be used. And so you want to make sure your vendors are going to adhere to that information, because what we run into a lot is we'll show up and the vendor will say, oh, this is a custom solution. And so it doesn't apply to PCI DSS. And it's, this major merchant's using it and their assessor says it's fine. That's not really true. Each assessor is going to have an opinion on that. And if it's not certified solution, you want to make sure that you have that language in your contracts with that vendor so that they are delivering that solution and then that it's PCI compliant and that they're going to adhere to those standards, even if they can't meet, some requirement to get it reviewed by QSA. And what that does is that if I come in and let's say for whatever reason your application is not logging or doing what's required under PCI DSS for your scope, you can go back to that vendor and say, listen, you're not meeting the requirements, and this needs to be met according to our QSA. And it prevents the vendor from coming back and saying, okay, that'll be $100,000, which seems to be what they usually do, and that it's custom. And so that ensures that whatever solution you have, they're contractually bound to meet PCI. Sometimes with the larger vendors, you won't be able to add that language. It all comes down to leverage and how big you are and how much they want your business. But that's something to negotiate up front, or just go with a certified solution and you don't have to worry about it because it's already been assessed.
And that's what it keeps coming back to, doesn't it? Just get something that they've already validated, and then you're done, right?
It makes it easier, and long term, it's going to solve the problems of these gray areas with these E2E solutions. Because if people just start using the certified stuff, then we as QSAs don't have to haggle or make judgment calls. Same thing for acquirers. We validate solutions there that you've implemented it according to the manual that you were provided, and that the ongoing maintenance is being met, and you're done. And your scope is significantly reduced.
This just isn't as hard as it once seemed. It's just very particular, because data protection is very particular. I still think that PCI is our data protection ally. We just have to implement the solutions properly. If y'all have another question, you could raise your hand while you're talking, because
so I have a thought. In fact, you just helped me think of it. It sounds like, we used to have the case where there were breaches because somebody was PCI compliant but not secure. Now it seems like we have a lot less of those, or not many at all. Could someone comment on that, and perhaps as to why that might be? Have the standards gotten better? Uh-oh, Jenny's thinking.
Well, yeah, I don't know, but I imagine so. And there's a saying in security, and I can't remember it, but just because you have all the rules in place doesn't mean that you are safe. Because to a small degree or a large degree, however you look at it, if there's humans involved in the process, there's your risk, there's your vulnerability. I do think in my short time, 7 years in the PCI arena, I have seen them tighten up things like sunset certain encryption services that you don't even want anywhere on your network anymore. They strengthen things here and there. I can't speak for the long term, but for the short term, I think they're doing a good job in identifying where the risk is erupting. And it changes every time we sleep. Every time we sleep, somebody wakes up and does something different that we've got to guard against. So just keeping up can be tricky. But personally, I think that that the controls have strengthened. And I bet if we looked at them, see, one of the things we stress in PCI is automated processes. Get those processes automated. And when you do that, what are you doing? You're removing the human. And honestly, Harvey, that's one of the biggest risks we have in any security process is the human. So we're
No,
getting,
it is, but you still have the human process in there because they wrote the automation, whether it's AI or whatever. But then let me ask this. Has there been a breach lately where somebody has been compliant, yet they were breached?
that's a good question. I don't know. Um, I don't know because honestly, I don't look at that kind of stuff. Richard might know, he might be more aware of that, those kind of things that go, but there's been 2 recent ransomware attacks. Those guys aren't necessarily subject to PCI, but they are subject to best practices. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say there's breaches occurring all the time in the payment space. Company I work for is a forensic investigator for PCI as well. And there's all kinds of breaches. In most cases that I've been aware of or seen, it is something incredibly silly that you wouldn't think. And some of these companies might be deemed compliant, but they're doing, there's a system with a default password out there, and what Jeni mentioned is right. The human element's always the weak link here. But in a lot of cases, it's just technical debt. It's an outdated system or legacy system that the company doesn't want to spend money on to upgrade. And or, there are some things that PCI doesn't protect you against, right? There's really nothing in the standard that speaks to phishing, even though that's the #1 way people are getting in now. And there's antivirus, but antivirus is a 20-year-old technology, right? There's detection and response tools now that are much more advanced.
And doesn't the DSS require security awareness training every year?
It does, but once again, you're relying on, I can't tell you as a QSA how many times, there's 2 requirements for training: developers and then just general security awareness. And most companies do okay with security awareness, but you can do a security awareness training and then do a phishing attack simulated against your company, and you're still going to have people that click the button.
Oh, yeah.
And more often than not, it's like a vice president. They just, so the value of some of this training, same thing with developers, right? They're required to go through secure code training so that they're developing secure applications. Every developer I interview, half of them still don't know this material, even though they've done training for the last 2 years. It's because they just kind of go through the training and then, it's forgotten. And really, to Harvey's point, what's fixed the development side is this DevOps or automation process where you've got tools that are going through that code automatically looking for weaknesses. That's really the solution. Relying on humans to look at it and tell you there's a problem is unreliable.
Yeah.
So, but to circle back around, in most cases that I've seen, the breaches that occur, even if a QSA said the company was compliant, they weren't. There's something, either the QSA missed it. In a lot of cases as QSAs, we come in, you as an organization define the scope. If you don't tell us about a database you have sitting up in the cloud, we're not going to find it. I mean, we're not crawling through your networks. We're looking at available data that is provided by you in a lot of cases, and we're asking administrators to kind of show us around. But we're there on site for maybe a week or 2, depending on the size of your organization. So we're gone, and there's only so much we're going to see as a QSA. And really, when you sign off on the AOC, it's not just the QSA; it's the merchant themselves are saying yes, everything is accurate. We performed this in good faith, and the assessor, was right there with us.
Yeah, it could be simple to obfuscate and have them not see stuff, but also it's been my experience, or maybe I'm just not good at that. It's gonna bubble to the top. If you've got something, you need to include it because it will bubble to the top. That's just how life works. My QSA even has a final process for assembling evidence, and at near the end of the process, when he's ready to turn his report over to his guys, he has a process he goes through. He says, this is designed to catch all the things that I might have missed earlier. I thought, wow, how clever is that? And it does. He was very But he's been with us, what, 3 years now? So he kind of knows our environment and he knows where to look. But you're right, Richard. A lot of it is still the honor system. He might ask to see policies, but not proof. Well, he usually does want to see proof, but everything can be broken. Everything can be tricked. We just have to bring our integrity to this game and do the right thing. Do the thing that we know is the right thing. And toward that end, I'm